He killed more people than Hitler, yet few know his name. Deep in the Congo, a king from Belgium unleashed one of the most brutal genocides in human history and got rich doing it. Millions died, villages vanished, severed hands piled up like currency. And yet there were no war crimes trials, no justice, just silence. For over a century, this atrocity has been buried beneath monuments, rewritten history, and national pride. But the truth didn't disappear. It was erased. And what Leopold did in the Congo, it changed the course of Africa forever. This is the story the world tried to forget. King Leopold II was not a conqueror in the traditional sense. He wore no armor, led no armies, and spilled no blood with his own hands. He was a man of suits and cigars, ink and deception. Born into Belgian royalty in 1835, he inherited a throne small in land but bursting with ambition. He looked at other European powers with envy. Britain had India, France had Algeria. Belgium? It was a postage stamp by comparison. Leopold was desperate to carve out an empire. But instead of taking it by force, he took it with lies. He understood the power of perception. He dressed his ambitions in the noble language of civilization, progress, and philanthropy. In private, he was cold and ruthless, a man who viewed Africa not as a place of people, but as a canvas for conquest. His obsession with expansion grew into something darker, something monstrous. And the world, blinded by his cunning diplomacy, barely saw it coming. In the late 19th century, European powers gathered at the Berlin Conference to divide Africa like slices of a cake, and Leopold walked away with the biggest slice of all. He convinced the international community he was on a humanitarian mission to end slavery, bring Christianity, and uplift Africa. In reality, he built a corporate hellscape. Under the guise of the Congo Free State, Leopold seized a land 76 times the size of Belgium. But it wasn't a state, it was his personal property. He didn't rule it like a king, he ran it like a CEO drunk on profit. He formed the International African Association, a so-called charitable organization. But behind its noble name lay a brutal economic engine built to extract ivory and rubber from the Congo's forests. Rubber was the gold of the era, and the Congo's vines were rich with it. Leopold saw dollar signs, the Congolese saw chains. Local leaders were tricked or coerced into signing treaties they couldn't read. Any resistance was met with annihilation. Villages burned, families scattered, cultures erased. He created a vast system of forced labor. Entire villages were ordered to collect rubber. Men disappeared into the forests for weeks, sometimes months, risking death by wild animals, starvation, or the brutal punishments that awaited failure. Children were used as leverage. Wives were taken hostage. Communities were bound by fear. The Congolese weren't citizens. They were hostages in their own land. And yet, this was just the beginning. Imagine this. You are a father, given an impossible quota to collect rubber from the jungle. You fail. Soldiers return, not to punish you, but to punish your children, or your wife, or your entire village. The Force Publique, Leopold's private army, used hostages, mutilation, and terror as their tools of control. Their most infamous punishment? Cutting off the hands of those who resisted. Dead or alive, hands became currency. Soldiers were required to provide a severed hand for every bullet fired. This was to prove they weren't wasting ammunition. But many took shortcuts. They killed children, severed hands from the living, and burned villages to the ground. One missionary described walking through a path where hands lay in piles like logs. Women were taken as prisoners to force their husbands to work. Children were whipped with hippo hide whips called chicots until they bled through their bones. Families were starved. Villages depopulated. Genocide disguised as business. Entire cultures were crushed under the boot of rubber quotas. Tribal leaders who resisted were executed publicly. Families were torn apart. Languages, customs, and oral histories faded into silence. 10 million people dead. A number so vast it silences breath. Missionaries from Europe often arrived with hopeful hearts, only to leave with broken spirits. They wrote diaries filled with horror, accounts of infants orphaned, villages emptied, and local chiefs forced to mutilate their own people or face death themselves. Photographs from the time still exist. One shows a man named Nsala sitting on a porch, staring at the severed hand and foot of his 5-year-old daughter, punishment for his village's failure to meet their quota. That photo helped awaken the West. But for millions of others, there were no photographs, no names, no justice. If this story is shocking you so far, imagine how much more has been hidden. Like the video, subscribe, and stay with us until the end, because the most disturbing truths are still to come. Whispers of horror eventually reached the ears of journalists, missionaries, and whistleblowers. But exposing a king is not easy. Enter E.D. Morel, a shipping clerk who noticed a sinister pattern. Boats leaving Belgium for the Congo were filled with guns and chains. Boats returning? Rubber, ivory, riches. There was no trade, only plunder. Morel launched a campaign. He printed pamphlets, held rallies, wrote articles. With the help of diplomat Roger Casement, he exposed the genocide to the world. Casement traveled to the Congo and documented first-hand accounts. His report was damning. Photos of mutilated children, testimony from survivors, maps of death and destruction. International outrage grew. Mark Twain wrote a scathing pamphlet titled King Leopold's Soliloquy, mocking the monarch's hypocrisy. Human rights organizations across Europe began to demand accountability. Even in the United States, then-President Theodore Roosevelt took notice. While no military intervention occurred, international pressure mounted. Still, for every outcry, there was a rebuttal. Leopold portrayed himself as a benefactor of the African race. His propaganda machine was relentless, painting roads, schools, and hospitals that barely existed. But the veil was lifting, and the world could no longer look away. Under immense pressure, Leopold agreed to hand over the Congo Free State to the Belgian government in 1908. But before he did, he ordered the destruction of the archives. Thousands of documents were burned, administrative files, testimonies, letters, all evidence of the carnage. What survived was just a fraction of the truth. The rest, lost forever in flames. Evidence, gone. Accountability, evaporated. History, erased. When he died in 1909, Belgians booed his funeral procession, and yet statues of him still stand today. His crimes washed clean by silence and time. No trial, no reparations, no justice. Just a legacy written in erased pages and severed hands. Even after the Congo was transferred to the Belgian state, the abuses didn't immediately stop. Forced labor continued under new names, and systemic racism was baked into the administration for decades. Leopold escaped the judgment of his era. And for much of the 20th century, he escaped the judgment of history. Why do we remember Hitler but forget Leopold? Partly because Hitler lost, and partly because Africa rarely gets a chapter in Western textbooks. Belgium has only recently begun to reckon with its past. School children still learn of Leopold as a builder of Belgium. His colonial crimes, a footnote if mentioned at all. The Congo, meanwhile, remains scarred. It is one of the poorest nations on earth, yet one of the richest in resources. That paradox began with Leopold. Modern Belgium owes its grandeur to colonial wealth, from museums to mansions, from opera houses to government buildings. Each brick whispers a hidden truth, and globally there is a silence, a reluctance to confront the dark heart of colonialism. The textbooks omit the details. The monuments go unchallenged. The blood-stained past is polished into patriotic legacy. The echoes of Leopold's cruelty still ring through the forests of the Congo. Corruption, exploitation, poverty. Foreign companies still drain its minerals. Its people still suffer. The instability we see today in the Congo is not incidental. It's the shadow of colonialism, the ghost of Leopold's greed. In 2020, protesters in Belgium defaced and toppled statues of Leopold II during the Black Lives Matter movement. It was a demand not just for racial justice, but for historical honesty. Activists, historians, and descendants continue to speak out, to demand acknowledgement, to demand that the world say his name. Because silence is complicity, and forgetting is a form of violence. As Congolese author V.Y. Mudimbe once wrote, colonization is not over until its memory is erased. And so the work continues. There are now petitions to remove his statues. Museums are being pressured to tell the full truth. And Congolese voices, once silenced, are demanding space in the global conversation. There's a reckoning underway, but the question remains, will it be enough? The story of King Leopold II and the Congo is one of history's darkest and most overlooked chapters. Millions suffered, yet his name is rarely mentioned alongside other infamous figures. Understanding the past, no matter how uncomfortable, is essential to making sense of the present. If you found this video informative, consider subscribing for more untold and forgotten histories. Share it to help shed light on stories that deserve to be heard. And let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What should we cover next?